So today we have a big treat for all members, old, young, old members, new members, first time to Oxonmoot. Our very dear friend, colleague and very famous radio broadcaster Brian Sibley has very kindly volunteered to do a video for us, telling us a little bit about his days in the society, his involvement with the Lord of the Rings and the films and the books that he wrote, and lots of little stories and snippets will be inserted along the way. So Brian, thank you very much for agreeing to do that today. And perhaps I can start by asking you a little bit about how long you've been a member of the Tolkien Society.
It's so long that I can't actually be absolutely specific about it at the moment. I think probably it must be 30 plus years. Certainly I was a member before I dramatised the BBC's Radio Lord of the Rings, and that was 1981 to whenever it was. So yes, a good few years, and I still... Some of the people who are members still would remember me from those days. In fact, Maggie, you sent a picture the other day and put it on my Facebook of a cutting from the Radio Times which showed a very early meeting at a moot meeting in London of the Tolkien Society, where I'm the only person I think who isn't in costume, sitting talking to the Tolkien Society about how I'm about to put the Lord of the Rings on radio. And it brought back so many memories. I mean, it brought back all those... I actually remember the meeting. I mean, I remember the fact that we all turned up. There was myself and there was a photographer from the Radio Times, and everybody was, all dressed up to the nines. And I think probably some people were not prepared for the fact that the Radio Times maybe treated it a little bit as a bit of a joke, really. And I'm not sure quite whether everybody, when they saw their photos in the Radio Times, were quite that happy about it. I noticed I was wearing a Guinness jersey, a kind of sweatshirt, and that's because I'd just written a book about Guinness advertising at the time. So I'm wearing a sweatshirt with flying toucans on it, which was slightly bizarre. But no, I remember that very, very well. I remember all that period extensively, and I loved the fact that the Tolkien Society really embraced it. I mean, they were very nervous and anxious about it. I remember a meeting we had at Church House, which was the head office of the Church of England, and we had a sort of conference there. And Jane Morgan, one of the producers, came along, and Peter Woodthorpe, and Michael Bakewell, my co-adapter, and I think Stephen Oliver, the composer, was there as well. And all these Tolkien people came and they asked all these questions: what are you going to do about this and how are you going to do that? And then it went out, and I remember being really sort of fearful, because the producer and other people just kind of thought, oh, well, they're the Tolkien Society. I don't mean they didn't say who cares, but it really was kind of like, well, they're just the nerds who love the book. But I was actually, of course, associated with the nerds who love the book. So I was really apprehensive, how people would react to it. But of course, it went really very well. And lots of great memories from that. But my Tolkien association, I mean, they go back to reading the books as a youngster, and if I haven't said this before, and I guess there are people, I hope you're all having a good lunch, by the way. I gather you're having lunch right at the moment, so I hope it's a good one. But I guess some people will have heard me say this before, but as a child I read The Hobbit and loved The Hobbit, but could not get into The Lord of the Rings. I think the problem was I got stuck on all the prologue with all the notes and stuff at the beginning, and I really just, all this stuff about pipeweed and this and that, and I just thought, I can't. And then I never really cracked it, and so I went on for years only knowing the Hobbit and the other shorter fiction, because I was one of those people who bought not Farmer Giles of Ham, I did buy that, but books as they were coming out, like Smith and Wootton Major, and as these books came out, I was buying them and reading them for the first time. So I loved all that, but I still couldn't crack this big book. And then when I was 21, I had a duodenal ulcer, and that put me in hospital, and that's what they did in those days, and I had complete bed rest for a month. And I took the book with me, and I thought, I am going to read this book, and I did, and it was just, it was, as you all know, how can I tell you anything you don't know about it? It's just, it was amazing. It was a revelation.
So what happened after that? And you became a member of the society. Were you press ganged, or did you voluntarily join?
No, I'd already joined before the Lord of the Rings went on radio, so I was already a member. But after that, of course, I started going to things, and I met Priscilla, and I was given the Society's gold badge and all of that, which was lovely, and I'm very, very proud to be still a member. And then a second kind of opening came along, which was that some books were being produced. John Howe, the publishers, HarperCollins, came up with the idea of John Howe producing some maps of Middle Earth. I mean, you think we actually had enough maps with Tolkien's and Christopher's, but still, John was going to do new maps, and they wanted someone to produce material to go with it. So I started producing a series of books. There were 3 of them: the maps of The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and also the Silmarillion. And I really enjoyed writing these. I mean, they were kind of a gazetteer, a kind of A to Z, of how to find your way around Middle Earth in the various ages. And I really enjoyed it. It's quite hard work and quite difficult because, particularly where things were not always, as across the ages, places changed, and the whole structure of the landscape was different. And John did some fabulous pictures. I mean, lovely little pencil sketches, which I particularly enjoyed. And they were then put together eventually in a single volume called The Maps of Middle Earth. And I love John's work. I mean, I'm a great admirer of both John and Alan Lee, both very, very different. And I love the fact, and it's one of the great things about the Jackson films, actually, is that these two fantastic talents, so different and yet so complementary, came together and produced the visual inspiration for Jackson's pictures. I love the fact, I love John's, all those kind of wild scenes of monsters. I remember talking to him once. I said, "How many pictures of the Battle of Gandalf and the Balrog have you done?" I mean, there's at least 4 or 5 of the things. But I also love Alan's lyrical landscapes, and the pastel shades of his pictures. So, they're 2 of my illustrative heroes in terms of Tolkien. And it was a pleasure to work with John. I've never done anything with Alan, but consider Alan, like John, a friend, which is terrific. So we did those books together, and I think probably the fact that I had this association with Tolkien already through the radio and through these books, that it became a kind of natural thing that I would then end up writing the making of books when Peter Jackson got the rights and started embarking on the Lord of the Rings, when that was, of course, a whole new big adventure.
So how long were you involved in writing the books for Lord of the Rings and subsequently The Hobbit? I mean, it must have been a huge part of your life, really.
It was a huge part of my life, across 2 periods of 3 years, well, more than 3 years, really. And to me, the most exciting thing, well, there's several exciting things. I think probably the first moment was seeing a film which Jackson had made to promote or to sell the idea of doing the Lord of the Rings, a little kind of promo film. And there was a shot which panned across a whole sea of books and pictures and of sort of sources, all the stuff that's available. And there was John and my map of Middle Earth in the middle of and I thought, that's our book. And when I later knew that, because it had on the front John's picture of the front door of Bag End from inside looking out, and I remember later when John said to me, when I first met Peter, he said, when you come to design Bag End, it's got to look like that. And I always thought it was wonderful that this picture, not that I had anything to do with the picture other than that it was on the book that I was associated with, had ended up as kind of the inspiration for what Bag End looked like in the film. And it was very, very exciting to begin with. I remember going to a cinema in London and being shown just a few fragmentary moments of the film. This was long before the preview footage was shown in Cannes. And I remember going with Jane Johnson, who writes as Jude Fisher, and Jane and I and David Braun from HarperCollins and Chris Smith, who's been my editor on my books. The 4 of us went to a preview theatre, and we all, it was like the most secret thing in the world. It was like something out of John le Carré. We had to sign in, and we had to swear affidavits and give blood samples and DNA samples and everything else. And then we went into this theatre and we saw, I remember bits that we saw. I remember the Black Riders galloping down to the ford not the ford, you know, the when they're chasing the hobbits, and they run onto that sort of jetty and they rein back and they've gone off on the raft across the water. And I remember that as one of the shots, and the shot of them under the tree roots they'd already filmed. So there were just these kind of glimpses of what it was going to look like. And I remember we came out of it and thought, my God, this is amazing. You know, somebody has done what we all thought couldn't be done. They've actually managed to put Middle Earth on film. It was fantastic. Hugely exciting. I remember going for the first time, the first thing where I met everybody, which was to Cannes, and they hired, New Line had hired a chateau just outside of Cannes because they were showing this 15 minutes of footage, which was basically the Mines of Moria, with a few kind of pastoral shots at the beginning, because otherwise it was all in the gloom and dark. And they hired this chateau, and the cast were doing kind of, you know, press stuff there, and they decked out. I mean, the money that must have been spent on it, but it created absolutely the right moment, the mood for it, because they had the stone trolls in the garden of this chateau. On the swimming pool, they had Galadriel's boat, the swan boat. The different rooms were dressed out as being like Theoden's chamber with his throne and kind of armour and horse shields and all the rest of it. Sort of heraldic flags everywhere. There was they recreated this was for the party which followed the premiere screening of the footage. They'd created a prancing pony in Brie where they'd employed giant actors, outsized actors, who were also standing on kind of raised areas. So when you went in, the bar was kind of up there, and you had to get your drink from off the top of the bar. And I also remember the loos were like hobbit holes. You went into these loos, and then they'd had this kind of weird idea that you were standing or sitting in the loo, whatever. And then every now and again there was the sound of charging Uruk-hai, which is sort of fed into the, which, you know, I assume if depending upon what you were doing in there, must have been slightly disconcerting. Anyway, it was a fantastic event, and Jane and I were very, very fortunate because we were just allowed to mix with the cast, and I've lots of memories of sitting there with, well, all the principals who were there for this kind of preview. And I remember going to the preview, and I remember being filmed coming out. I don't know whether it was ever appeared on anything. And they were grabbing people as they came out and saying, "What did you think? What did you think?" And we were all stunned by it because, I mean, none of us had seen anything of significance really of the footage. And the whole audience, I mean, I've never seen an audience like it, because these were hard-bitten, you know, film critics and reviewers and people, and the whole cinema just erupted, you know, at the end of the Mines of Moria scene. It was just kind of like everybody, you just knew this was, you know, whatever anybody might say critically about the film later, this was going to be a work of cinematic genius. There was no question. And I remember coming out and being grabbed by someone with a microphone or press people and saying, "What did you think? You know, tell us what you thought." And I remember saying something or other, but they were just grabbing everybody and just trying to see what they thought. And then we all went to this party. And the party went on for hours and hours and hours, and it was just completely magical. And that was, for me, was, I think, probably the most magical moment. Although there's lots of other magical moments, which is, you know, a few months later going to New Zealand, and then going into the original Bag End, and then starting meeting people and talking to people on the sets and all that kind of experience, which I, you know, really enjoyed. And we did feel very much part of that project. You know, you couldn't help but feel it was something really major, and you were somehow there documenting this piece of cinematic history. You know, this sounds pretentious in a way, but I don't believe it was, because I think it was an extraordinary achievement.
Okay, well, time presses on, sadly. I wish we could spend hours hearing all your wonderful stories.
You can.
We could. But the soup will be going cold, no doubt.
Oh, right, okay.
And the lunch will have to be coming to a... Before we stop, though, I know you've got some wonderful pieces of artwork and book things that we... Yeah,
I was just going to show you one or two of my treasures, really. And the first one, of course, I think probably has to be this, because I know I gather there's a lot of new members of the Tolkien Society, and I'm going to talk to you now, hello, and I hope you're having a nice lunch, or have had a nice lunch, and I hope you enjoy your time in the Tolkien Society. This is the original artwork by Eric Fraser for the Radio Times cover for The Lord of the Rings, 1981, and it appeared in the April-May. It didn't. When did it appear? 7th to the 13th of March 1981, front cover. And on the back of it, there's a letter. I'd written to them. You can Dan will take a picture of this in a moment. You can see it. But this is the letter. The moment I heard that Eric Fraser was producing this artwork, I was so thrilled, because my dad worked in commercial art prior to the Second World War, and he used to say to me, "This artist is a great artist." Whenever there was a Radio Times cover with art by Eric Fraser, he'd say, "This man is absolutely brilliant." And the moment they said to me, "Oh, Eric Fraser's doing the cover," and I knew that this was a legendary artist who had done probably more covers than anybody else, fantastic, amazing art. And so I wrote a letter, care of the art editor of the Radio Times, and said, "Can I buy the original for the cover for the Radio Times that you're doing for The Lord of the Rings?" And he wrote back, this is January the 2nd, 1981, "Dear Brian Sibley, what a pleasant surprise to get your letter about your forthcoming serialisation of The Lord of the Rings and my contribution to it. I was very pleased when asked to design the RT cover, as it would give me a chance of doing something different. I'm working on it now, and it is on my desk in front of me. With regard to the sale of the original, that is dependent on whether the BBC return it to me or not. Perhaps you could use your influence to persuade them to let me have it when they finish with it, and then we could do a deal. With many thanks for your interest and all best wishes for the future. Sincerely, Eric Fraser." Well, I did. I just wrote back and said, "Whatever you charge for it, I have it. I have to have this piece of art." And I think he charged me 45 guineas or something, which was quite a bit of money at the time. But what happened was that the moment that he'd done the artwork and it was finished and everybody had seen it, all the people connected with the BBC's production, including the producer and the head of drama and in fact I think the managing director of the BBC, were all trying to get the original, but too late because I'd already got it. Now the second piece of art that I wanted to show you was this, which is a drawing by an artist called Robin Jakes. Many of you might be familiar with his work. He did illustrated a wonderful series of books by a writer called Ruth Manning Saunders, and books of dragons, Book of Wizards. You probably know the books. And this is his drawing of Frodo, which appeared in the Radio Times in July 1982, which was the first repeat of The Lord of the Rings on radio, when it went to 1 hour episodes. And again, Dan will do a close-up of this in a minute, but the thing about it is that it's a beautiful piece of work, and Frodo is looking at the ring, which is on a very fine chain, and he's surrounded by this kind of miasma of obviously the influence of the Dark Lord swirling around him. It's a beautiful, delicate piece of work. And although Frodo's legs are very hairy and his feet are hairy, he obviously missed that bit of Tolkien's description of saying that the hair on their feet was thick and brown and curly like that, which is on their head. And he hasn't got curly hair on his head either, but it's a lovely little picture, and I think very few of you will have seen it unless you had a Radio Times cutting that you've kept from 1982. So that's another prized possession. And this one is really rather more personal, really. Some of you will recognise it. It's Farmer Giles and Chrysophylax Dives from Poems and Stories by Tolkien, originally published in 1980. And this was given to me as a gift by Pauline Baines, the artist. I've got quite a number of Pauline's pictures. She was a very close friend, dear friend of mine. And I love this picture because I love it. It symbolises to me everything about Pauline Baines's art for Tolkien, which is the incredible attention to detail, this beautiful kind of ornate, almost medieval kind of style. You know, it's kind of leaping out of its frame almost. It's like an embellished picture in a manuscript, but it's kind of breaking free, which is very, very clever. And the fact that in fact there's only two colours the black and white, and the orange, which was the feature of these particular suite of illustrations that she made for that book. So that's another very treasured Tolkien possession. And the only other thing, I guess, is this, which is my copy of Tom Bombadil. And this is the copy that I sent to Tolkien when in 1969 as a young man, and asked if he would sign it for me. And I got a letter back from Joy Hill, and many of you will know her name, saying, "Dear Mr. Sibley, Professor J.R.R. Tolkien has asked me to return your copy of The Adventures of Tom Bombadil." My heart sank at that point, because I knew that he didn't always sign things that were sent to him, which he has autographed on the title page. And you will see that on page 60, Professor Tolkien has made a correction to the last line of the poem on that page. And it is signed on the title page, and subsequently signed by Pauline Baynes. And I remember this very well, that I took this to her. We used to go, my partner and I used to go and visit Pauline regularly, and I took this with her and I said, "Look, this is signed by Tolkien. You need to sign it as well, because it's very much a collaborative work." And she said, "Oh, I can't possibly sign. You know, you've got his signature." And I said, "No, I want your signature as well." So she did. She actually signed kind of across his signature, which in a funny kind of way was slightly weird, but I love it, the fact that they both signed it. And I will show you the correction on page 60. You might suppose, what could it be? Is it very, very exciting, this correction? You know, what is it? Well, what it is one word missing, the word I. So the last line of the poem, "For still they speak not, men that I meet," and the I had been left out. I don't know which edition this when it went back in, but anyway, he'd corrected it, which is just a fantastic little moment. And I guess, Maggie, the other thing I need to say is that I haven't given up on Tolkien. I'm sorry I'm not with you all, by the way, but I haven't given up on Tolkien, because if you know this book, or any of you have ever seen it, this is Tove Jansson's illustrations to The Hobbit, as published in Finland, not available in an English edition at the time being, but her amazing illustrations. She's the creator, if you don't know her name, of the Moomins, which you may have come across. And this is probably my favourite illustration in the book, which is the ponies crossing the bridge to Rivendell, which is utterly fantastical. The illustrations are very much of her style, but they have a real Scandinavian northern feel to them. And the reason I'm showing you this, you'll know this by now because you'll have seen the press releases, but the next Tolkien calendar is the pictures of Tove Jansson did for The Hobbit, and I've written the kind of history page on the back, so you can read what I've said about how they came to be made, and maybe one day we'll actually see a British edition of the whole book, which I think would be great. So there we are, Maggie. I guess that's probably...
Well, sadly, I wish we could go on for hours and hours and hours, and you've got such an amazing collection of books and pictures, and
stuff.
Of course your own collections as well. But thank you so much for taking the time. We wish you could have been with us in real flesh, but this is the next best thing. So
well, thank you, Maggie, and thanks to Dan for photographing this, and thank you for listening to me if you have been. If you haven't, well, I hope the lunch was good anyway. Have a great time in the Tolkien Society. I send you all my best wishes. Wish I was with you, but have a great Oxonmoot, and I hope we'll meet again soon. God bless.